Blood dripped onto the wooden steps of the research cabin belonging to Dr. Marcus Harlow as the lioness stood motionless, her gaze locked on his. She carried her dying cub in her mouth, its small body limp, barely breathing. Actual tears streamed down her face, leaving dark streaks in the dusty fur. This scene defied everything Marcus understood about wildlife behavior after his 15 years as a field veterinarian in Tanzania's Serengeti National Park. "Don't move," he whispered to himself, frozen on his porch with hands raised in a gesture of non-aggression. The lioness was a mere 12 feet away, close enough for him to see the desperate intelligence in her amber eyes, yet far enough to offer a chance to retreat inside if she charged. This was not just any lioness. Marcus recognized her instantly as Nyota, marked by the distinctive scar across her right ear. She was part of the pride he had studied for the past 3 years, a pride accustomed to his distant presence but one that had never, ever approached his research cabin. Until now. The cub dangling from Nyota's mouth was her last surviving offspring. Over the past month, Marcus had documented the pride's struggles, territorial conflicts, unusually heavy rains scattering their prey, and worst of all, the spread of what appeared to be a respiratory illness targeting the youngest members. One by one, Nyota's other 3 cubs had succumbed. This last one, the smallest male Marcus had nicknamed Dogo, had been showing symptoms for days. What happened next would change everything Marcus understood about animal cognition and the complex relationship between humans and wild predators. Slowly, deliberately, Nyota placed her cub on the ground at the foot of the steps. Then she stepped back, her eyes never leaving his face. The message could not have been clearer had she spoken, "Help him." Marcus had dedicated his life to observing, never interfering. The cardinal rule of wildlife research was to maintain distance. Nature must take its course. Intervention was frowned upon, potentially career-ending if deemed unnecessary by his peers and the Tanzanian Wildlife Authority. Yet here was Nyota, breaking every natural law of her species, approaching a human dwelling, practically begging for intervention. The cub convulsed suddenly, a pitiful mewling sound escaping its tiny body. Without that sound, Marcus might have held his position, might have maintained the professional distance ingrained in him after 15 years in the field. But that cry, so fragile, so desperate, broke something inside him. "This is insane," he muttered, slowly moving down the steps. Nyota growled softly but did not retreat. Her body language was tense but not threatening. She watched as Marcus cautiously approached her dying cub, her eyes showing an impossible awareness, a recognition that her natural enemy might be her cub's only hope. Marcus knelt beside Dogo. He was now close enough to see the labored rise and fall of the cub's chest, the mucus crusting around his nostrils, the shallow, rapid breathing indicating severe pneumonia. It was the same condition that had taken the other cubs, but perhaps caught earlier this time. "He needs antibiotics," Marcus said aloud, speaking as much to himself as to Nyota. "And fluid therapy. Oxygen support." As a field veterinarian, his cabin was equipped with basic medical supplies, enough to treat minor injuries or illnesses in himself or his research assistants, who were currently away gathering data at the park's eastern edge. But treating a lion cub required specialized knowledge, proper medications, monitoring equipment. "I'd need to take him inside," Marcus said, meeting Nyota's gaze directly. The logical part of his brain screamed that this was madness. Wild lions do not seek human help. They do not stand placidly by while humans touch their cubs. They certainly do not understand human speech or intentions. Everything his scientific training told him suggested this was either a stress-induced delusion or a coincidence being misinterpreted through his human lens. But another part, the part that had drawn him to animal behavior in the first place, recognized something profound happening, something that transcended scientific understanding. With agonizing slowness, Marcus reached toward the cub. Nyota tensed, her muscles coiling visibly beneath her fur. Marcus froze, then continued his movement with even greater care. His fingers touched the cub's matted fur, feeling the unnatural heat radiating from the tiny body. Dogo was burning with fever. "And he made it through the night," Marcus told her later, his voice rough from fatigue. "His fever's down, and his breathing is improving." He hesitated, scarcely believing his own words. I think he might recover. Nyota's response was immediate and astounding. She approached the steps, then lowered her head in what appeared to be a gesture of gratitude. Marcus stood transfixed. In 15 years of fieldwork, he had documented countless lion behaviors, but nothing remotely like this. The next 3 days fell into an extraordinary routine. Marcus continued treating Dogo with antibiotics, fluids, and supportive care. The cub's improvement was slow but steady. His fever disappeared completely by the second day, and his breathing normalized by the third. Most remarkably, he began eating small amounts of the soft meat Marcus prepared. Throughout it all, Nyota remained. She left briefly each night, presumably to hunt, but always returned by morning. She never attempted to enter the cabin or reclaim her cub prematurely. Instead, she waited with a patience that defied explanation, somehow understanding her cub needed more time. Marcus documented everything meticulously, not just Dogo's medical treatment and recovery, but Nyota's unprecedented behavior as well. He knew his observations would be met with skepticism. A lioness seeking human help, entrusting her cub to a human for days, these behaviors contradicted everything known about wild lion behavior. On the fourth morning, Marcus made a decision. Dogo was eating well, breathing normally, showing every sign of full recovery. It was time. Marcus bundled the cub in a soft blanket and carried him outside. Nyota rose immediately, her focus intense but not threatening. With slow, deliberate movements, Marcus descended the steps and placed Dogo on the ground halfway between himself and the lioness. For a moment, the cub seemed confused, blinking in the bright sunlight. Then Nyota made a soft calling sound. Dogo's head swiveled toward his mother. On wobbly steps, still weak from his ordeal, the cub tottered toward her. Nyota met him halfway, nuzzling him gently, inspecting him thoroughly with motherly concern. The reunion was both tender and wild, a perfect distillation of nature's raw beauty. Marcus watched, transfixed, as mother and cub re-established their bond. Then, in a final gesture that would forever reshape his understanding of animal cognition, Nyota looked directly at him. She held his gaze for several long seconds before turning away. Message received. Thank you. As Nyota and Dogo disappeared into the tall grass surrounding the cabin, Marcus collapsed onto the steps, emotionally and physically drained. He had no illusions. This was not a story where he'd made a wild friend for life. Nyota was still a wild predator, and Dogo would grow to be one as well. Their natural wariness of humans would likely reassert itself, especially as the cub grew older. But something profound had transpired. A moment of cross-species cooperation that transcended the boundaries between predator and prey, wild and civilized. Nyota had recognized both her desperate situation and the potential solution a human might offer. She had made a calculated choice that defied instinct in favor of a higher reasoning. 2 weeks later, Marcus's research assistants returned. He shared his detailed notes and the cabin's security footage. Their initial skepticism transformed into awe as they watched the events unfold. This changes everything, Marcus, said Amara, his senior assistant. The implications for cognitive research, for conservation approaches. I know, he replied quietly. But we need to be careful how we present this. If word gets out that lions are approaching humans, he didn't need to finish. They all understood the delicate balance of wildlife conservation where humans and predators lived in close proximity. Sensationalized stories could lead to dangerous situations for both. In the end, they agreed to prepare a careful, scientifically rigorous paper for peer review, emphasizing the event's exceptional nature and the specific circumstances that may have led to it. They would share the video evidence only in controlled academic settings, at least initially. 1 month after Dogo's recovery, Marcus spotted Nyota's pride during routine observations in the eastern sector. Through his binoculars, he saw 5 adult females and several cubs. Among them was Dogo, now noticeably larger and healthier, playing under the watchful eyes of the pride's females. As Marcus watched from a distance, Nyota separated from the group, moving to a slight rise. Though it was likely coincidence, It seemed for a moment that she was looking directly at him. Marcus raised his hand in an involuntary gesture of greeting. The lioness held her position for several seconds longer than necessary, her silhouette regal against the setting sun. Then she turned and rejoined her pride, disappearing into the Serengeti's golden grass. Some might say it was just his imagination, the human tendency to anthropomorphize, to project human emotions onto wild creatures. Perhaps it was. But Marcus Harlow knew what he had witnessed that extraordinary week in his cabin. A moment when the boundaries between species had temporarily dissolved, when a desperate mother had sought help from an unlikely ally, and when he had responded not as a scientist, but simply as one living being to another.